"You're the backup," Tyler said, not quite looking at me. "Jake's in an OR right now, getting his appendix taken out, and I need a best man in 11 hours. Before I could even process that sentence, a woman in a half-zipped bridesmaid dress and exactly one shoe walked into the room, looked straight at me like she already knew my face, and said, "Good. I requested you specifically." I had never met this woman in my life. At least, that's what I thought at the time. My name is Nathan Cole. I was 31 years old, a firefighter paramedic with Engine 14 out of Asheville, North Carolina. And up until that Friday afternoon, my entire relationship to this wedding had been showing up, wearing a rented tux, and standing quietly in the back while somebody else did the important parts. I wasn't supposed to speak. I wasn't supposed to be remembered. I was a groomsman, one of 6, chosen because Tyler Brennan and I had been best friends since the 3rd grade, back when our only shared responsibility was not losing each other at recess. 9 years on a rescue truck teaches you a few things about people. It teaches you that most emergencies aren't really about the thing everyone's yelling about. It teaches you to stay calm when a room full of strangers is losing its mind, because somebody in that room needs to be the person who isn't. And it teaches you, eventually, that the version of you who's steady at 3 a.m. in a stranger's kitchen with a family member screaming behind you is not automatically the version of you who's good at anything that requires staying still long enough to be known. I found that out the hard way 2 years earlier, when my fiancée at the time, Claire, sat me down at our kitchen table and told me she couldn't keep doing this. "Not the shifts," she said, "not the schedule. The way I came home from a call that had gone badly and told her I was fine, then didn't say another word for 2 days." She didn't leave because I did something wrong. She left because I was very, very good at not needing anyone, and it turns out that's its own kind of wrong. After that, I got quieter. I got more reliable and less available, which people mistake for the same thing. I showed up for everyone. I just didn't let anyone all the way in. So when Tyler called me on a Wednesday night, panicked, saying his older brother Jake, the actual best man, the guy who'd given a toast at Tyler's college graduation and helped him move 4 times without complaint, had just been rushed into emergency surgery 2 days before the wedding, my first instinct wasn't excitement. It was dread. "You want me to give a speech?" I said. "I've known some of these people for 48 hours. "You've known me for 23 years, Tyler said. "That's the only speech that matters." I told him I'd do it because that's what you do for the person who was there when your own life fell apart, and because saying no to Tyler Brennan had never once worked in the history of our friendship. The wedding was happening at a restored orchard property 20 minutes outside town, the kind of venue with string lights strangled through apple trees and a barn that smelled like cedar and candle wax. I arrived Friday afternoon for the rehearsal in my work boots, because I'd come straight from a 24-hour shift, and I was standing just inside the barn, trying to figure out which of the 6 identical groomsmen jackets was mine, when Tyler cornered me with the news about Jake. I remember thinking, with the particular exhaustion of a man who has not slept in over a day, that this was going to be a very long weekend of nodding politely at people I'd just met. Then she walked in. Later I would learn her name was Avery Quinn, 28 years old, marketing director for a nonprofit that built community health clinics, and the bride's best friend, since the 2 of them were assigned lab partners in 9th grade biology and set a Bunsen burner on fire, trying to impress a boy neither of them liked in the end. In that first moment, though, all I knew was that a woman with dark auburn hair falling out of a half-finished updo, one bare foot, and a look of complete unbothered authority had just walked into a room full of stressed-out wedding people and said the words "I requested you specifically" like she was ordering a coffee. I looked at Tyler. Tyler looked at the floor like it had personally wronged him. "Do you 2 know each other?" I asked, because that seemed like the obvious question. Avery answered before Tyler could. "We'll get there," she said, and picked up her missing shoe from a chair like this was a completely normal thing to say to a stranger. "For now, you need a tux fitting, and I need you to not look like you got hit by a truck. No offense." "I got off shift 4 hours ago," I said. "That would explain it," she said, and there was something in the way she said it, something almost fond, that didn't match the fact that we had just met. I want to be clear that I am not a man who is easily rattled. I have pulled people out of car wrecks while calmly asking them their kids' names to keep them conscious. I have stood in burning kitchens and not raised my voice. But something about the way Avery Quinn looked at me, like she already knew things about me I hadn't told her, put a small, persistent crack in my calm that I couldn't explain and didn't like. "I'm going to ask again," I said. "Have we met?" She studied me for a second too long, the corner of her mouth doing something complicated. "You really don't remember," she said. Not quite a question. "Remember what?" "Nothing," she said, and the word landed like a door, closing gently instead of slamming, which was somehow worse. "Ask me again this weekend. I'll tell you when I feel like it." Then she turned and walked off toward the bride, leaving me standing there holding a groomsman jacket that, it turned out, was not even mine. The rehearsal itself was chaos in the specific, loving way weddings always are. The officiant kept mixing up which aisle side belonged to which family. Megan, the bride, cried twice, once out of joy and once because her mother rearranged the seating chart without asking. Tyler forgot his own vows rehearsal line and blamed jet lag from a flight he hadn't taken. And through all of it, I kept catching Avery watching me across the barn with an expression I couldn't file into any category I recognized. Not flirtation exactly, something closer to relief. At the rehearsal dinner, seating put me directly across from her, which I suspected was not an accident, given the amount of quiet, precise coordinating Avery Quinn appeared to be capable of. She wore a green dress that made her eyes look like something you'd want to study for a while, and she spent the first 20 minutes of dinner interrogating me about my job with a level of detail most people reserve for job interviews. What kind of calls, how long the shifts ran, whether I'd ever had one that stayed with me. I gave her the practiced, sanded down answers I gave everyone, the ones with all the sharp edges filed off. She wasn't buying it. "You do that thing," she said, halfway through the appetizer, where you tell a very calm, very edited version of something that was clearly not calm at all. "Occupational habit," I said. "You strip the panic out before it reaches other people. It's called triage." "That's a good line," she said. "Did you practice it?" "A little." She laughed, and it wasn't the polite dinner party laugh she'd been handing out to relatives all night. "It had teeth in it. I like that you admitted that," she said. "Most men would have pretended it was spontaneous." I asked her what she did for a living, mostly to get the spotlight off myself. She told me about the nonprofit, about the 3 clinics her team had helped open in underserved counties in the past 2 years, about a director position that had just opened up at the national office in Denver that half her coworkers assumed she'd get offered before the year was out. She talked about it the way people talk about things they want and are scared of wanting, fast and a little too casual, like she could disguise the size of it if she moved quickly enough through the sentence. I recognized that particular sleight of hand because I did it constantly myself. "You'd leave Asheville?" I asked. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me again this weekend too. Apparently that's my whole personality right now, deferred answers. You're very good at those." "I've had practice," she said, and something flickered behind her eyes before she smiled it away. Halfway through dessert, Megan stood up to make an unplanned toast about how grateful she was that everything had come together, despite Jake's appendix trying to ruin the whole event, and the table laughed, and Avery leaned toward me and said quietly, under the noise, "For what it's worth, I really did ask for you." "Ask who?" "Tyler?" "Megan," she said. The second Jake called from the hospital, before either of them even started panicking about logistics, I told her I already knew who should replace him. I set my fork down. "You've known me for 4 hours. "That's not entirely true," she said, and there it was again, that patient, almost sad amusement, like she was waiting for me to catch up to a conversation that had started somewhere I hadn't been invited yet. I spent the rest of that dinner running through every wedding, every mutual friend's barbecue, every gym or grocery store or fire department open house I'd worked in the last 2 years, trying to find her face in any of it. Nothing came up. Whatever she remembered, I had lost it completely, and the not knowing sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't put down. I didn't sleep much that night, and not entirely because of the mystery. Somewhere between the rehearsal dinner and the last round of drinks, I'd learned from Marcus, the groomsman with no filter and even less self-preservation instinct, that one of the other groomsmen, a college friend of Tyler's named Preston, had dated Avery for the better part of a year, 2 summers back. Didn't end badly, Marcus said, unhelpfully, around a mouthful of cake someone had let him steal early. Just ended. He still looks at her like he's waiting for a rerun. I filed that away with the rest of the things I didn't know what to do with yet. The next morning, getting ready in the groomsman's room above the barn, Preston turned out to be exactly the kind of easy, effortlessly charming guy that made my jaw tighten without my permission. He shook my hand, told me congratulations on stepping in as best man like it was a mildly impressive accident, and then said, casual as anything while straightening his own cufflinks, "You and Avery seemed close last night." "We just met," I said. "Sure," he said, in the tone of a man who didn't believe that and wasn't particularly trying to hide it. Marcus, sensing blood in the water the way only Marcus could, leaned over and muttered, "Don't worry, Cole. She dumped him for being, and I quote her exact words, emotionally furnished like a hotel room." I laughed before I could stop myself, and Preston's easy smile went a little thinner around the edges for the rest of the morning. The next morning was the wedding day itself, and there wasn't time to chase mysteries because there was a schedule with the terrifying precision of a military operation, all coordinated, as far as I could tell, by Avery Quinn, with a laminated timeline and a walkie-talkie clipped to her dress. She ran the bridesmaids like a field commander, kept Megan from spiraling twice, fixed a broken zipper with a safety pin and pure will, and somewhere in the middle of it found 4 minutes to make sure my tie was straight before I walked down the aisle, standing close enough that I could smell something like citrus and rain on her skin. "Nervous?" she asked, adjusting the knot with hands that were steadier than mine had any right to feel about it. "About the speech or about you?" I said, before I could stop myself. Her hands paused for exactly 1 second. "Careful, Cole," she said. "That's a very forward thing to say to a woman holding a safety pin near your neck." "Occupational habit," I said. "I say the true thing and then immediately regret it." "I like that habit," she said, and stepped back before I could figure out what to do with that sentence. The ceremony itself went the way good ceremonies go, which is to say, it was over faster than anyone expected, and left half the guests crying anyway. I stood up front holding the rings and watched Tyler's face when Megan came down the aisle, and for a minute I forgot to be self-conscious about anything, because that's what a real wedding does to you if you let it. Somewhere in the crowd, Avery caught my eye and mouthed, "You're doing fine," which I hadn't realized I needed to hear until she said it. It occurred to me, standing there holding 2 rings and watching my oldest friend's hands shake as he said his vows, that I hadn't been to a wedding in almost 3 years, not since my own engagement had quietly, privately dissolved into a box of returned gifts and an apartment that echoed too much. I'd told myself I was fine with that, the way I told myself I was fine with most things. And standing under that arch of string lights and apple branches, I realized how much of that fine had just been a very convincing performance for an audience of 1. The reception moved into the barn as the sun went down, string lights flickering on, and I gave the best man speech I'd been dreading since Wednesday. I talked about the 3rd grade version of Tyler, who once tried to trade his entire lunch for one of my fruit snacks, and considered it a fair deal. I talked about him showing up at my apartment the week Claire moved out with 2 pizzas and 0 questions, just sitting with me until I was ready to talk, which took about 4 hours. I didn't cry, but I got close enough that my voice did something unfamiliar near the end, and when I sat back down, Avery reached over under the table and squeezed my hand once, quick, like she was afraid of making it a bigger moment than it needed to be. I held on to that longer than the gesture technically lasted. Later, during the part of the reception where the dance floor filled up and the DJ started taking requests from increasingly drunk relatives, Avery found me by the drinks table, both of us hiding from a great aunt who wanted to discuss the state of my love life in detail. "You still haven't told me," I said. "Told you what?" "Whatever it is you keep saying you'll tell me this weekend." She looked at the dance floor for a second, at Tyler spinning Megan under the lights, and something in her posture changed, softened into something more honest. "Walk with me," she said. "Not here." We ended up outside the barn, near a row of apple trees, where the noise of the party faded into something manageable, the string lights bleeding gold across the grass. Avery wrapped her arms around herself against the cool evening air, and I offered my jacket without thinking about it, the way you offer a hand to someone climbing out of a car wreck. Automatic, no calculation involved. She took it. 6 months ago, she said. I was having dinner with my father at Larkspur, downtown. You know the place. I nodded. I'd eaten there twice. He started having chest pains halfway through the appetizers. I thought it was heartburn. He thought it was heartburn. Then he went gray and slid halfway out of the booth, and I was screaming for someone to call 911, and a man 2 tables over was already up and moving before I'd even finished the sentence. My stomach dropped, slow and cold, the way it does right before you remember something your body knew before your mind did. Larkspur, I said. March 14th, she said. You were off duty. You were having dinner with someone, I think. A coworker maybe, and you just got up. You didn't ask permission. You didn't wait for anyone to tell you it was serious. You had my father on the floor doing compressions before the hostess had even found a phone. I closed my eyes for a second, and it came back to me in pieces. Disconnected the way trauma memory always is. The particular checkered pattern of the restaurant floor. A woman's hand locked around my forearm hard enough to leave marks. Her voice saying please, please, please on a loop, while I counted compressions out loud, to keep my own rhythm steady. I remembered the hand. I had never once connected it to a face. You grabbed my arm, I said slowly. The whole time, I remember the grip more than I remember you. I left bruises, she said, almost apologetic. I found out later. I didn't even notice I was doing it. I noticed, I said. I just didn't know whose hand it was. She let out a breath that was half laugh, half something rawer. My dad's fine, she said. Full recovery, stents, dietary lecture from 3 different doctors, back to annoying me about my dating life within 2 months. But I never got your name that night. You left before the ambulance crew even finished loading him, because another call came in and you were already moving toward your car. I asked one of the paramedics who you were, and all he said was, "That's Nathan, he's one of ours," before he drove off too. So you had a first name and nothing else, I said. For 6 months, she said. Then Megan told me her fiancé's best friend was a firefighter named Nathan, and I made her show me a picture before I'd even RSVP to a single wedding event, because I needed to know if it was the same one. It was, she confirmed. And when Jake called about the appendix, and everyone panicked about finding a replacement best man on 48 hours' notice, I didn't panic. I told Megan exactly who to ask. I stood there, under the apple trees, holding the weight of that for a second. The strange vertigo of learning that a stranger has been carrying you around in her memory for months, while you carried nothing at all. I'm sorry I didn't recognize you, I said. You weren't supposed to. You were doing your job. That's the whole point. The version of you I met that night wasn't even really about me. It was about my dad. This weekend was the first time I got to actually see you, and not just the emergency version. And? I asked. Her eyes came up to mine, steady now, no more deflecting. And I like this version considerably more, she said, which is inconvenient, because I came into this weekend telling myself I'd just say thank you properly and leave it there. What changed? You did, she said. The way you talked about Claire without making it sound like a wound you're still bleeding from. The way you gave a wedding toast that actually meant something, instead of the recycled best man material everyone uses. The way you fixed Megan's uncle's broken chair leg during cocktail hour without being asked, like it physically hurt you to watch something stay broken when you had 2 working hands. That's not romantic, I said. It's the most romantic thing I've watched all weekend, and I watched two people get married 4 hours ago." I laughed, and the sound cut through some of the tension gathering in my chest. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "I think you should kiss me before I lose my nerve and go back to being the woman who organizes seating charts for a living." I didn't need a second invitation. I stepped closer, cupped her face in both hands, careful the way you're careful with something you already know matters, and kissed her under the string lights, while somewhere behind us the DJ played a song neither of us could name later, because neither of us was paying attention to the music anymore. When we finally broke apart, her forehead stayed against mine for a long moment. "For the record," she said, breathless, "I've been planning this since March. You just found out about it 11 hours ago. That's an unfair head start." "I'll catch up fast," I said. "You'd better," she said. "I don't do slow." Before we made it back inside, Preston found us anyway, drink in hand, wearing the specific smile of a man who's decided to say something he'll regret before he's fully thought it through. "So, this is fast," he said, looking at Avery, then at me, then at my jacket still around her shoulders. "You've known him what, a day?" "Long enough," Avery said, and there wasn't an ounce of apology in it. "Careful," Preston said, not quite joking. "You always do this. Big feelings, fast timeline, and then 6 months later you're telling everyone it just fizzled." End quote. I felt something in my chest go very still and very steady, the same stillness I use when a scene is chaotic and somebody needs to be the calm one. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I think she can decide that for herself," I said, without a performance review from her ex-boyfriend at somebody else's wedding. Preston looked at me for a long second, recalculating, and then, to his credit, backed down. "Fair," he said, and left it there, disappearing back toward the bar. Avery let out a breath I hadn't realized she was holding. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I didn't do it for you," I said. "I did it because he was wrong, and wrong things bother me. Occupational habit." "There's that habit again," she said, some of the tension leaving her shoulders, replaced by something warmer. "I'm starting to really like your occupational habits." We went back inside eventually, mostly because Tyler sent a search party in the form of Marcus, who found us holding hands by the apple trees and announced it to the entire reception with the subtlety of a man 3 drinks deep. Megan cried a third time. Avery's father, Richard Quinn, walked directly over to me with his wife trailing behind him, shook my hand for an uncomfortably long time, and said, "Son, I've been waiting 6 months to properly thank the man who kept my heart beating on a restaurant floor, and I did not expect to also be thanking you for making my daughter smile like that." "I didn't do anything special," I said, and Richard laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from a man who knows exactly how untrue that sentence is. "That's precisely the problem with you," he said. "You keep saying that about everything that matters." The rest of that night blurred into dancing and cake, and Avery's hand finding mine every time we passed each other on the dance floor, like neither of us wanted to test how long we could go without touching. By the time the reception wound down and the last guests were being poured into cars, we were sitting on the barn steps together, my jacket still around her shoulders, both of us too wired on adrenaline and something bigger to think about sleep. "I have to tell you something else," she said, quieter now, the party noise thinning behind us. "The Denver job. It's not hypothetical anymore. They called this week, final interview is in 10 days. My stomach did something complicated. "That's good," I said, and meant it, even as some smaller, more selfish part of me flinched. "It's the job I've wanted for 3 years," she said. "And it's 1,400 miles away, and I met you 11 hours ago. And I know that's a ridiculous thing to be thinking about right now, but I'm thinking about it." "Then think about it," I said. "Don't let one good kiss under some apple trees talk you out of something you've wanted for 3 years." She studied me carefully. "You mean that?" "I've spent 2 years being very careful not to need anybody," I said. "I'm not going to start needing someone by asking her to shrink her life down to fit around mine. That's how you break something before it's even started. She was quiet for a moment, tracing a line along my knuckles with one finger. That's the second time tonight you've said something devastating like it wasn't a big deal, she said. Occupational habit. Stop using that excuse. Can't. It's load-bearing. She laughed, soft and real, and leaned her head against my shoulder, and we stayed there until the lights inside the barn started going out one by one. Over the next 10 days, before her interview, we saw each other constantly, in the gaps her schedule and my rotating shifts allowed, which turned out to be more time than either of us expected, once we both stopped pretending we weren't rearranging things to make it happen. She came by the station once with coffee for the whole crew, and my captain, a 20-year veteran named Ruiz, who had watched me date exactly nobody in the 2 years since Claire, took one look at the way I lit up when Avery walked in and said, loud enough for the whole bay to hear, "Well, would you look at that? Cole remembers how to smile." End quote. I nearly threw a wrench at him. Avery thought it was the funniest thing she'd heard all week. We had the conversation neither of us wanted to have on a Tuesday night, sitting on my back porch with 2 glasses of wine, going warm and untouched between us. "The Denver interview is Friday," she said. No preamble, because Avery Quinn did not believe in softening things that mattered. "That's good," I said, and I meant it, even though it landed in my chest like a stone, dropping into still water. I've been thinking about calling and pulling out. Why? Because 10 days ago, I met a man who ran toward my father's collapsed body without being asked, and gave a wedding toast that made me cry, and kissed me like he'd been waiting his whole life for permission, and I don't know how to just leave that behind because a job offer has good timing. "You wanted this job for 3 years," I said. "That doesn't stop being true because of me." "I know," she said, frustration creeping into her voice. "That's what makes it so unfair. I don't want you to be the reason I don't even try, and I don't want to go and spend the next year wondering what this could have been if I'd stayed." I set my glass down. "Then don't make it either of those things," I said. "Go to the interview, see what happens, and let's find out if what's happening between us is strong enough to survive some distance, instead of deciding right now that it isn't, just because that would be easier to manage." Her eyes went bright. "You'd do long distance?" "After what happened with Claire? Claire left because I stopped letting her in while I was standing right next to her," I said. "This is different. This is choosing to stay in each other's lives on purpose, even when it's inconvenient. That's not the thing that broke us last time. The silence was the thing that broke us." She reached for my hand across the small table between us. "I'm scared," she admitted, and it cost her something to say it, I could tell. The way admitting fear always costs people who've built their whole identity around having a plan for everything. "Good," I said. "Means it's worth being scared about." That's an insufferable thing to say. "I've been told." She took the job. She flew out for her final interview 8 days later, and I drove her to the airport at 5 in the morning, both of us running on almost no sleep, and I kissed her goodbye at security, like I had something to prove, which, honestly, I did. She called me the second she landed. She called me after the interview, giddy and disbelieving, saying they'd offered her the position on the spot, start date in 6 weeks. I told her I was proud of her, and I was, and underneath the pride was a low, steady ache I didn't bother pretending wasn't there. The 6 weeks before she moved were some of the fullest of my life. We spent every off-shift together, learning the small, ordinary details you only learn by actually being present. That she couldn't sleep without a fan running even in winter. That I talked in my sleep on the nights after bad calls, and she'd started learning which words meant she needed to wake me gently, instead of letting me finish the dream. We fought exactly once, over nothing really, over whether I was pulling back emotionally to protect myself from the coming distance, and she called it out directly, the way she called out everything directly, and I had to sit with the uncomfortable truth that she was right before I could apologize properly. "You're doing the Claire thing," she said, "going quiet before the goodbye actually happens, like you can get ahead of the pain by starting it early." "I know," I said. "I'm trying not to." "Try harder," she said, not unkindly. I'd rather have all of you for 6 weeks than half of you pretending it doesn't hurt. So I tried harder. It turned out to be one of the better decisions I've made. The day she moved, I helped load a U-Haul in the rain, both of us soaked and laughing about it, because there wasn't anything else to do. At the state line, where I'd driven the first leg with her before flying back, so she wouldn't make the whole trip alone, we stood beside the truck while the sun came out behind the clouds, and she said, "This is the part where you're supposed to say something that makes this feel less like an ending." "It's not an ending," I said. "It's a very long, very inconvenient beginning." "That's better," she said, and kissed me like she meant to carry it the full 1,400 miles by herself. We made it work the way people make long-distance work, which is to say, imperfectly, with effort, with video calls at odd hours around my rotating shifts and her new job's demanding schedule, with 2 visits a month that felt too short every single time, with the occasional bad week where the distance felt less like a bridge and more like a wall neither of us knew how to climb. There was one stretch, around month 4, where a bad string of calls left me quieter than usual, and I caught myself doing exactly what she'd warned me about, pulling back instead of reaching out. And it took her flying out unannounced on her one free weekend, showing up at my door with a bag and a look that dared me to send her home, for me to remember what I'd promised her at that little cafe table back in Asheville. "I'm not doing this with you," she said, standing in my doorway, rain in her hair again, because apparently that was our theme. "I didn't fly 4 hours to watch you disappear into yourself. Talk to me, Nathan. Actually talk to me." So I did. I told her about the call that had gotten to me. A kid, a bad one. The kind you carry home even when the outcome was as good as it could have been. I told her I was scared that loving her the way I wanted to would mean eventually breaking her heart with my silence, the way I'd broken Claire's. She listened to all of it without flinching, and when I finished, she said, "I'm not Claire, and you're not the man who broke things with her anymore, or you wouldn't have just told me all of that instead of saying you're fine." She was right. She usually was. That wasn't the only rough patch. 2 weeks after that visit, we had our first real fight, the kind that happens over video call with bad lighting and worse timing. I'd missed her promotion dinner, a small celebration her Denver team threw when the first clinic under her new program officially opened its doors, because a call came in 20 minutes before I was supposed to leave the station and ran 4 hours long. I texted her an apology from the truck. She didn't respond for a full day, which was unlike her, and when she finally called, her voice had an edge to it I hadn't heard before. "I know your job comes first sometimes," she said. "I signed up for that, but you could have called instead of texting 3 words and going quiet for 18 hours. I was elbow deep in a rollover accident, Avery. I didn't exactly have a free hand." "I know that," she said, frustration cracking through. "That's not actually what I'm upset about. I'm upset that the second things got hard, you went quiet, exactly like you promised me you wouldn't." I sat with that for a second, because she wasn't wrong, and pretending otherwise would have been its own kind of lie. "You're right," I said. "I got overwhelmed and I retreated instead of reaching out, and I'm sorry, and I'm going to do better than a text next time, even if better just means 5 seconds saying I can't talk yet, but I'm thinking about you." Her voice softened, some of the fight going out of it. "That's all I need," she said. "I don't need you to be perfect at this. I need you to keep trying even when you're tired." "I can do that," I said. "I plan on doing that for a very long time." We talked for 2 more hours that night, working through it properly instead of letting it fester into the kind of silence that had ended things with Claire. And by the time we hung up, whatever distance the fight had put between us had closed back up, tighter than before, like a wound that heals stronger at the seam. By month 7, I'd started looking into transfer opportunities to fire departments near Denver, quietly, not telling her at first, because I didn't want to make a promise I couldn't keep. When a position opened at a station 20 minutes from her apartment, I applied without a guarantee of anything, went through interviews on my days off, flying out at my own expense, and didn't tell Avery a word of it until I had an actual offer in hand. I showed up at her apartment on an ordinary Thursday she thought was just another visit, and instead of walking in with a duffel bag for the weekend, I walked in with 2 suitcases and a folder with the transfer paperwork inside it. She looked at the suitcases, then at me, then back at the suitcases, and her whole face changed. "What is this?" she asked, voice unsteady. "I got a job 20 minutes from here," I said, "starting in 3 weeks. I didn't want to tell you until it was real, because I've spent enough of my life promising people things I couldn't guarantee, and I wanted this to be a certainty when I finally said it out loud." She dropped the folder she was holding straight to the floor and crossed the room fast enough that I barely got my arms up in time. "You're moving here," she said, half question, half disbelief, pressed against my chest. "I'm moving here," I confirmed. Because I did the math on being the guy who stayed steady for everyone else's emergencies my whole career, and it turns out the bravest thing I've ever done had nothing to do with a burning building. It was choosing to need somebody again. "That was almost too smooth," she said, laughing and crying at once. "I practiced it on the plane." "I knew it." "A little," I admitted. "Doesn't make it less true." A year and a half after that wedding weekend, Tyler and Megan asked me to be a groomsman again, this time at their vow renewal, a small backyard thing to celebrate their first anniversary. And somewhere in the planning chaos, the actual best man from their wedding, Jake, fully recovered and appendix-free, made a joke that landed closer to true than he probably realized. "Feels like déjà vu having you two orbiting the wedding party again," he said, nodding between me and Avery, who by then had moved back to Asheville herself, having transferred within her nonprofit to run the very clinic program she'd helped launch 2 years earlier, close enough to home that neither of us had to keep choosing between a life and each other. "Backup best man strikes again," Jake said. "No offense, Cole, but you might be cursed to always end up in these things sideways." "I requested him specifically," Avery said, deadpan, echoing the exact words she'd said to me the very first time we met. And the whole yard went quiet for a second, before everyone burst out laughing, because by then most of them had heard the story of how we started at least a dozen times, and it never stopped being a good one. Life in the months after she moved back settled into something neither of us had ever quite had before, ordinary in the best possible way. Avery kept a laminated calendar on our fridge that color-coded everything from clinic openings to my shift rotations, which I teased her about constantly and secretly relied on more than I'd ever admit. I kept a small CPR mask keychain clipped to my bag, the same model I'd used on her father that night at Larkspur, and she noticed it within the first week of living together and went very quiet for a moment before kissing me without explanation. We fought exactly twice in that first year, once about closet space, which she won decisively, and once about whether cereal belonged in the same cabinet as coffee, which I still maintain I was right about. We made up both times the same way, with terrible takeout and worse television, laughing more than the argument had ever warranted in the first place. She still ran her life like a field operation, timelines and lists and color-coded folders, and I still came home some nights quieter than I meant to be, carrying a call I hadn't figured out how to talk about yet. The difference now was that she'd learned to read the specific kind of quiet that needed space, and the kind that needed a hand on my back and a direct question, and I'd learned to actually answer the question instead of retreating into the calm, edited version of myself I'd spent years perfecting. Her father, Richard, took to inviting me to his Sunday morning fishing trips, which mostly involved him talking and me listening, and somewhere around the 6th or 7th trip, he told me, without much ceremony, that he'd stopped worrying about his daughter's heart the day he found out who'd caught her attention. I didn't tell him that was one of the nicer things anyone had ever said to me, but I think he knew. Later that night, after the small ceremony wrapped and the yard had emptied out to just close friends and fairy lights strung between 2 oak trees, I found Avery sitting on the porch steps in almost the exact position she'd been in the night we first kissed, except this time there was no mystery hanging between us, no 6-month secret waiting to surface. I sat down beside her and pulled a small object out of my jacket pocket, something I'd been carrying for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment that I'd stopped trying to plan perfectly and had decided to just let happen honestly instead. It was a ring, simple, Nothing showy. The kind of thing a woman who ran laminated wedding timelines with a walkie-talkie clipped to her dress would actually want to wear every day. I've been thinking about something you said, I told her, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. What's that? That the version of me you met at that wedding wasn't the emergency version. That you got to see me for real for the first time that weekend. I remember, she said, watching my hands, already understanding where this was going before I finished the sentence, the way she always understood things a half step ahead of me. I want that to be true for the rest of my life, I said. Not the calm, edited version people get when I'm managing a crisis. The real one, the one who needs you, who's scared sometimes, who isn't good at asking for things, but is going to spend every day getting better at it, starting now, by asking you the biggest thing I've ever asked anybody. Her eyes had gone glassy, one hand pressed to her mouth. Avery Quinn, I said. 6 months before I even knew your name, you grabbed my arm on a restaurant floor and didn't let go. I think some part of me has been trying to figure out how to hold on to you back ever since. Will you marry me? She didn't answer right away, not because she was uncertain, but because she was laughing and crying at the exact same time, the way she'd been doing at every important moment in our whole relationship, and when she finally managed the word, it came out fierce and certain. Yes, she said. Obviously yes. I basically requested this specifically too, if we're being honest. I laughed, sliding the ring onto her finger with hands that, for once in my professional life, were not entirely steady. Backup best man, I said, reporting for permanent duty. Best decision Jake's appendix ever made, she said, and kissed me while somewhere behind us, Tyler started loudly narrating the whole thing to anyone who'd listen, which, considering how we started, felt exactly right. What would you have done if a stranger told you she'd requested you specifically for a wedding you barely knew anyone at? Would you have pushed for the answer right away, or let the mystery unfold the way I did? Have you ever had a stranger remember you from a moment you don't even recall? Tell me your story in the comments. And for those of you who want to be a little closer to us, we've opened memberships where you'll get shorter, exclusive stories every week with no ads. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.